Today I'm going to show you how to do a simple clay cutter design in Fusion 360. When you first upload the program, this is what you're going to get, this top screen. And the first thing I always do is in this top right hand corner, you want to click the top of this cube, and this is going to reset your page for you. The second thing we need to do is now import a canvas. Now this is where people trip up because they try and use an SVG and it slows the program down. I have found much more success if we insert from this panel here and pick canvas, insert from my computer, and I've already been on Google and saved a JPEG of a leaf. Now then, the first thing that pops up is this canvas dialog box, and we need to select a plane, which is this orange square here. The reason I went to the little top of the cube at the very beginning is just to make this step easier. So we press on that one and it does drop it in here. We don't need to worry too much about the size just yet, but I like to just make it big enough so we can see what we're doing, and we can perhaps rotate it 90 degrees so that it looks like a leaf, and select OK. We can scroll in using the mouse button, but you can see it goes off the page. So if you need to move something around, you can go to this little hand symbol and select that and pan, and you either click off onto the screen to get rid of the pan, or you can press escape. The next important part I find is actually calibrating the size of this. Now Fusion is quite tricky to resize things, so I like to do it at this stage. So if you know this particular leaf you want to make, say, 35mm long, there is an easier way to do that in the canvas section before we start doing any drawing. So just on this left hand side we click the little arrow next to canvases, and you can see we've got Untitled 2, which is our leaf. So we right click on that, calibrate, and then you get a little crossbar here. So you pick the top by a click of your mouse and the bottom, and at the moment it's saying 31.68 blah 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 millimeters. So for this tutorial I'm going to say we're going to make this a 35mm tall. So all you do is type in 35mm, press return, and hey presto, that's your size. The next bit's the fun part. This is where we do what Fusion 360 call a sketch. So we need to go up to here where it's this little box with the cross, the green cross, and select that. Again, it's giving you this little orange box. This is the plane we're going to be working on. It's a bit like a layer, if you guys are familiar with that on perhaps Photoshop or something like that. But for the purpose of this video, we're just going to select this plane, which means we're going to be working on top of this leaf sort of drawing. Now you do have a sketch palette, mine has disappeared for some reason, so we're going to click on those arrows, and this is our sketch palette, and it's going to give us a few options which we'll go through in a moment. If we head to the top left here, you'll see we've got a line, a box, a circle, a fit point spline, which we'll be using in a moment, a mirror, which I will go into, and the sketch dimension, which I don't personally use very much. But for this one, we're going to choose a fit point spline. This is what you would do for any kind of weird curves or anything interesting like that. So select this one. What we're going to do is head up here to the very top and press with our mouse to do 1 point. Now you'll notice, depends which way you want to go. Let's go this way to the left to start with. What you want to do is click and sort of trace the outline. You will probably see that it's curving as you go, so try and get anywhere there's a curve like there, you want to go in the middle of it because then it will bend backwards. Scroll in if you're struggling to see or it's doing anything silly. You can adjust these in a moment. So when we get to about this point here, we're going to double click with the left hand mouse, and that's going to stop our fit point spline. If we press escape at this point, you can grab and pull these about a little bit. Again, use the pan tool if you need to, just to see. Escape to come away from the pan tool, and maybe just drag that a little bit to get that perfect line. Okay, we're happy with that. Escape again to get rid of the pan tool. So we need to do another one for the other side. But just before we do that, I want to just mention you can do a mirror if you wish. So So if we're going to use the mirror option, it won't trace the canvas exactly, but it will make it symmetrical. So for this purpose, we can choose the line, and it will snap to this little centre point, which makes it a little bit easier for you. So I would go from here downwards and just click till you have a solid line, and escape if it tries to draw another line. Then we can choose the mirror function, select the object, which is the blue wavy line we've just drawn, and the mirror line, which is the black line. And if we just hide the canvas, you can see it's drawn us this leaf shape. At this point, you could have pressed OK if you wish, if you're happy with that. We could trim off those little two funny bits at the top and the bottom, and that would be your leaf shape complete. But I'm going to cancel that. And what you can do is press Ctrl and Z if you want to go back a step or several steps. So we're going to continue on with this funny leaf shape. So again, we're going to choose the fit point spline, and we go back to this white blob here, and it will snap to it because that's where we started from. And you can click on that, and again we can start working our way around that shape. Now you can still move to the pan tool and escape out of it if you can't find where you're going. And sometimes you need to drag it quite a long way to get that curve. If it's a long piece, or if it's a short bit like this, you might have to fiddle about with it. And it doesn't actually matter if it goes a little bit off the line, it's not the end of the world. But when you want to get to where you've started from and you get back to that little white dot, you can double click, and again that gives you your line. If we press escape, we can go to that node and start just adjusting our shape, making sure we're happy with it. You might need to drag them a little. You might need to chuff about a bit to get the shape vaguely where you want it. And you'll notice it turns blue as I hover over it. That is because the show profile box is ticked in this design palette, which is really handy sometimes but not always, and we'll go into that in another video. So I can press escape at this point, and we can also hide the canvas, and this is our shape. If you want to see it without the little black dots, you can untick the points box, and I think that's quite a nice little shape to deal with. So that's it for the shape, apart from one thing. Now this is the most important thing. You need to open the sketch palette here by pressing that little triangle, and you want to right click on sketch 1 and save as DXF. This is by far the most important thing you will find if you ever want to reproduce this shape. If you want to make another one that's a smaller shape or a bigger shape, this is absolutely crucial. So click Save as DXF, and you can give it a file name, Leaf1. Put it wherever you like on your computer, perhaps make a sensible file for it, but save that as a DXF, because if you ever want to make it bigger or smaller, like I say, you are going to need that shape. But today we're just going to make this one. Now if I've pressed finish sketch, you'll notice that all of my little tools have disappeared, and you think, oh, and I want to go back and I want to do something. What more can I do? You need to go back into the sketch, so you can go right click sketch 1 again and edit sketch. Now sometimes for some reason this menu doesn't come up, so if it doesn't come up, press the little eyeball twice and do it again. Don't ask me why, it's just something I've found. So we're going to use a new tool. This is how we create the walls. Now I like to do 3 walls. I like to do the cutting blade, then a wall to support that, and then the base. So I use the offset for this. Click offset, and if you select the outer line you've just drawn, with a bit of luck it will give you this red line around the outside. If you want to change it to the inside, by all means you can, but I like to go all the way to the outside on this particular type of cutter. And you'll also notice it's 1 mil here. I make my cutting walls 0.4 mil. Press return, and you can see it's put this tiny little wall. The next thing we need to do you go to offset again. Now, unless you've changed the outer wall, it gives you an error and says you can't do this. So we have to go from the inner wall again. So select the inner wall. This time I'm going to say 1.2 mil, give you a little bit more room. And you may notice we're getting all these irritating little blobby things and numbers and God knows what. This is dimensions and constraints. Now we don't need to worry too much about these, so I would suggest at this point you turn them off by using this little palette here, and you can just untick show dimensions and constraints because it's too complicated to really explain them right now, so trust me, just get rid of them. The next thing you also might notice is we've got a really sharp corner on these walls now because of the shape of the leaf. So I like to do what's called a fillet. So we go up to this little kind of arch here, and I might just scroll in a bit to show you this. So normally when you click on that point, you can see where the red line is. Now don't panic too much. You can either adjust the fillet, so I like to go to perhaps 1, and you can see it's made a nice little curve there. So let's go with 1. Perhaps not, maybe that was too much, so Control and Z to get rid. Fillet again, we'll try 0.6 for instance, and that looks better. So that's just rounded off that little top sharp piece. We can do the same at the top here. You can also drag this if you wish to show what sort of shape it's looking, but I like to say the same both, so 0.6. Now, as I mentioned, unless you've changed the outer wall, you can't offset it, but this one we've just changed, so this time we can offset that. And this is going to be our little base, so click on the offset wall, and 1mm is about right, so I'm just going to press return. So this is our basic shape. At this point, I want to just make sure you realise that it will need some structure too, because if you were to squeeze this that way, it's obviously going to be a little bit rubbish. So if we scroll in, we can use the line tool, select somewhere on that wall, we can pull it across, and when you hit the other wall, double click. And we'll do that again. If you want to offset, if you definitely say, right, I want 3mm, we can do that, but what's going to happen is you'll have an overhang here and a little gap there, which is a little bit too much of a pain, so we'll cancel that. You've got to bear in mind that each of these squares, depending on where you're zoomed in, is usually 1mm. You can sort of guess if you want a 3mm bar across the middle, you're near enough. So again, click on the side of the wall. That little constraint pops up to say that that's parallel to that, which is quite handy because you know they're not going to be all wonky. So we can double click, and we have finished our sketch, ready to have our walls. So we can press finish at this point. Now then, how does this turn into a clay cutter, you ask? The next process we need to learn is this little beauty called the Extrude. Now, if you're still in the sketch palette, so if we go to edit sketch and you're still in here, you'll notice you haven't got any of these buttons. You can't, this is just purely for sketching. So if you want to extrude it, you won't be able to just at this point. And it's worth noting that some of these things like the fillet, there is a fillet for the extrude as well, which is the solid parts of this program. So we do need to make sure we finish the sketch. So now we've gone back to these little beauties here. So we're going to choose the extrude, which is a little cube. I'm just scrolling a little bit and you'll see all the sections are blue, which is good. This means they're all connected, they're solid. If you're having any problems and they're not solid, you've got a hole somewhere and you'll have to go back and fix it. But at this point, it should have been a fairly simple shape. So we're going to choose this inner wall first of all, and I like to do my cutting blade 13mm tall and press return. Ooh, but look, the whole sketch has disappeared. Don't ask me why, I don't know why it does it, but all we've got to do is go to the eyeball and it brings your sketch back. So then we're going to click extrude again, and the next wall I like to be 10.5mm and return. And then the base and the little support bar across I usually do as 2mm, return. But at this point you've no idea whether it's 3D, you don't know if you've done anything strange, so what I do is click the orbit, which is here. Make sure you do actually have the orbit symbol, and you click and drag and you can see that we have this 3D shape. Okay, so we're going to escape to get rid of that tool, and I like to get rid of my sketch lines because they just get in the way, so I just eyeball that one so that gets rid of them. So we can see now we have this lovely little 3D shape that's nice and secure. But just for finishing, there is a couple of other things I like to do. I was working with one particular matte filament on my 3D printer when I was first starting, and I found it very difficult because the wall kept breaking between the cutting blade and the outer wall. It kept snapping off, and it did actually turn out to be the filament. But to try and work around that, I put on another type of fillet. This is a solid fillet to kind of support the wall, and it's just something I've done since, to be honest. So you can see the junction between the outer wall and the inner cutting blade. I select that and the opposite one. You'll see it draws this black line for you. Now I like to do a 0.4 fillet, and can you see how it's put this little extra like section in? That's a curve in like that. Press return. That's number one. So you can see now that it's got from the side perhaps this little wall that just helps it a little bit to be a bit stronger. The other fillet I like to do is on the outer edge of where you actually hold it, because that makes that just that little bit smoother. So we click on that one, and I try and do a 1mm. Now that's interesting. This one's saying it can't do it. Now sometimes it depends on the shape. So I'm just going to have a little scan around with my orbit, make sure it's all let's get rid of that, go away. Hang on, escape that, we don't want that. Go back to fillet again and see if we can choose. Might just have to move that. So we've asked it for a 1mm fillet, and it doesn't like it. You can see the line is all connected. So the only way around that is to make the fillet smaller. So 0.9, there we go. Sometimes it just doesn't like being a millimetre. But now you can see we've got that lovely beveled edge, and that's our cutter pretty much done. So we'll return out of all that. You can see you've got your cutting blade, your wall, your base, and your little support bar across the middle. Now this is ready now to be saved. And what it calls them, which always makes me laugh, is this: they are bodies. So anything you make into a solid is a body. And in more complicated designs, sometimes you have to join them all together, but it doesn't matter for this process. So what we're going to do is go up to your bodies tab, right click your body and say save as mesh. You'll get this little bar here. The format needs to be an STL. I like the refinement to be high, and I don't tend to use the 3D print utility thing because it saves it as an STL anyway, so I like to just go straight to Cura, my slicing software, to get printed. So press OK for that. You'll get this little section here, but I'm going to save to my computer at the bottom. We'll call it leaf 1, and we'll save that to my downloads. And that is that. Your clay cutter is finished. So here is our leaf printing. Got about 5 minutes left. Here's a finished cutter. I will include links to the printer and the filament that I particularly like to use. My Etsy shop will be down there too, where you can purchase other STL files of my original designs. If you found this video useful, you might also consider hitting that Buy Me a Coffee link, which gives a small donation and helps me create content in the future. This would be so appreciated as I am self-employed. Thank you so much for watching, and happy crafting!